They say the world only sees the surface. For me, that surface was a crisp white apron, cheap non-slip shoes, and the weary smile of a woman working a double shift at the Exchange Bistro. My name is Nia, but today, right now, I was just server 402. The Exchange wasn't a diner. It was where the city's money ate lunch. CEOs, brokers, and politicians. They came here to close deals and remind themselves how far above the rest of us they were. I took the job 6 weeks ago. It was temporary, a low-profile necessity. Nobody looks twice at a waitress rushing past with a tray of iced tea. That was the point. Anonymity was a powerful tool when you needed to observe without being observed. I needed to observe Mr. Sterling. He sat at table 7, a prime corner booth near the window. Sterling was a man built on leveraged debt and pure arrogance. He owned a chain of logistics companies. On paper, a massive success. In reality, a labyrinth of shell corporations designed to bleed the government dry. I knew his balance sheets better than his own CFO did. I knew the specific complex accounting maneuvers he used to hide nearly $40 million in taxable income last year alone. But he didn't know that. To him, I was background noise. A temporary human hurdle between him and his overpriced Sauvignon Blanc. The stress of the double life was brutal. All day, my hands wiped mustard from tables. All night, those same hands typed 15-page internal memoranda on complex tax fraud cases for the Treasury Department. I was juggling trays and 9-figure audits. I needed the hours. I needed the cash flow while the case built. And most importantly, I needed the vantage point to see how he behaved when he thought no one important was watching. He was waiting for a business partner. Impatient, loud, the kind of person who believes volume equates to status. I approached his table to refill his water, balancing the heavy glass pitcher carefully. "More water, sir?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Service voice. He didn't look up from his phone. He just extended his glass, waving his hand dismissively. "Fill it, and for God's sake, hurry up. This place hires people who move like sloths." A small familiar knot of heat tightened in my chest. I felt it every time. The subtle, systemic dismissal. The assumption that my presence here proved my inferiority. I poured the water, avoiding eye contact. I had to remind myself, he is a suspect. I am a professional. My mission is bigger than this cheap interaction. As I set the pitcher down, he finally glanced up, his eyes sweeping over me with contempt. He noticed the delicate silver necklace I wore, a small family heirloom that peeked out from under my collar. "You know," he drawled, leaning back in the plush leather booth, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from the next table. "People like you shouldn't wear things like that. It's confusing." I froze. "Confusing. Sir?" I asked, my tone dangerously level. He laughed, a dry rasping sound. "Yes, confusing. You're supposed to be here, serving, carrying trays, not looking like you belong at the auction block, selling the actual silver. Focus on your tasks. Don't try to elevate yourself above your station, darling. It makes the rest of us uncomfortable." He picked up a menu, dismissing me completely. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the stares of the diners at table 6, a quiet gasp from the young woman having lunch alone near the hostess stand. "People like you." In that moment, the weight of the apron, the heat of the kitchen, the fatigue of the long hours, it all focused into a single, sharp point of pain. It was the pain of being judged not by effort or intellect, but by the visible, immutable fact of my skin in a space he decided I didn't deserve. My jaw ached from holding the silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam the pitcher down and walk out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I took a breath so shallow it barely registered. Is there anything else I can get for you right now, Mr. Sterling? I managed, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. He smirked, clearly enjoying his public dominance. Yes, go get me the wine list, but make sure you don't smudge it, and try to look less resentful. Your attitude is going to hurt your tips, you know. He pulled out a thick wad of cash from his wallet, 50s and hundreds, the casual display of wealth meant as a weapon. He threw a single-dollar bill onto the table, right where I had been standing. That's for the trouble of having to see you, he said, his eyes hard and cold. I looked at the dollar bill. It lay there, a symbol of profound disrespect. He thought he could quantify my humiliation. I felt the sudden urge to reach inside my apron pocket, where my work badge, the government-issued one, was carefully wrapped in a handkerchief, to pull it out, slap it onto the table next to his pristine bread plate, and watch the color drain from his face. Nia Aqua, Special Audit Agent, IRS Criminal Investigation. I imagined the moment, the way his arrogant posture would crumble, the realization that the woman he just called the help held the keys to his entire financial empire. But I restrained myself. The time wasn't right. Not yet. The investigation was still in its final critical stages. I needed one more piece of verifiable data related to the physical transfer of funds he was planning this afternoon. I simply nodded, maintaining the blank facade of the overworked waitress. The wine list. Right away, sir. I turned and walked away, not looking back at the dollar bill or his self-satisfied grin. I headed straight toward the service station, my mind racing. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the immense power I was holding back, the immense, crushing weight of justice ready to fall. I pulled out my phone beneath the counter, hidden by a stack of clean napkins, and sent a discreet, coded message to my primary contact, Agent Torres. Target 7 exhibited high aggression, verbal abuse confirmed. Proceeding with observation of scheduled 14 sounds easy meeting. Readiness confirmed. I placed the phone back in my apron pocket. The wine list was thick and heavy in my hand. It was almost 1:30 p.m. His partner was due in 30 minutes. I walked back towards table 7, the paper trail of his financial crimes burning vividly in my memory. He was about to order a $500 bottle of wine to celebrate a deal that was built on theft and fraud. He was about to learn that the person he insulted at his table was the very person tasked with taking everything he owned. I stopped just outside his periphery. I waited for him to look up from his phone again. When he did, his expression was still arrogant, expecting subservience. I didn't hand him the wine list immediately. I just held it, meeting his gaze clearly this time. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice softer now, almost too quiet for the busy restaurant. "I see your afternoon is set to be very productive." He raised an eyebrow, impatient. "Just give me the list, Nia. Stop lingering." I held the wine list tighter, the corners digging into my palm. "I only ask," I continued, a slow, deliberate cadence entering my speech, "because before your partner arrives, there is a very important matter we need to discuss. It pertains to your company's 2022 tax filings, specifically Schedule C." His face shifted, the casual arrogance fracturing instantly, replaced by a sudden, sharp fear. He frowned, trying to place my words. "What? What are you talking about? Are you trying to sell me something?" I didn't answer. I reached into my apron pocket, past the temporary service pad, past the wadded tissues, and pulled out the small silver official badge. I kept my hand low, shielding the agency name from the rest of the diners, showing the ID only to him. His eyes fixated on the badge. The color was draining from his face, exactly as I had imagined. "I am not selling anything, sir," I whispered, leaning in just slightly, ensuring my voice was low. contained, and devastating. I am here to audit everything. I let the weight of the revelation settle, watching his carefully constructed composure fall apart. He tried to speak, but only a dry rattling sound escaped his throat. "You see, Mr. Sterling," I continued, never taking my eyes from his, "the Internal Revenue Service takes a rather dim view of nearly 50 counts of wire fraud related to corporate expenses, and I am afraid your scheduled meeting this afternoon will have to be cancelled. You have a mandatory appointment with me." I placed the wine list gently on the table, face up. "Don't move," I instructed, my voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of the federal government. "My team will be joining us shortly to take possession of your electronic devices and financial documents." His hand twitched toward his phone. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Sterling. You see, I know every number you've tried to hide, and right now, you need to decide if you want to be cooperative or if you want to make this much, much harder." I straightened up, pulling off the cheap white apron and folding it neatly over my arm. The uniform was officially done. I was no longer Server 402. I was Naya Aqua, and my work had just begun. He stared at the apron in my hand, then at the badge, utterly speechless. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in front of his eyes, delivered by the woman he had tried to humiliate moments earlier. The front door chimed. I glanced up. Agent Torres and 2 uniformed officers were walking in, scanning the room. Their eyes immediately locked on mine. This was the moment of quiet, terrifying power. I looked back at Mr. Sterling, who was now sweating profusely, trying desperately to formulate a defense that wouldn't exist. "Don't worry," I told him, meeting his frantic gaze. "I'll make sure they collect that dollar bill you left on the table. It might be evidence." I needed to meet Torres near the entrance and brief the officers on the extraction protocol, but I paused just for a moment, savoring the silence of his shock. It felt good. It felt like justice. But the true work, the long legal battle to ensure this man paid for every crime, was just beginning. I couldn't let the emotion distract me from the protocol. I left him there, frozen, staring at the empty air where the waitress had stood. The dollar bill still lay mockingly on the white linen. I turned toward the entrance, ready to initiate the procedure that would change his life forever. But before I could take 2 steps, a sound stopped me. Sterling cleared his throat, a wet, panicked sound. He finally found his voice, high-pitched and weak. Wait, just a second. You can't be serious. This is entrapment. You were my waitress. You can't just—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the severity of what he was facing. I turned back, pinning him with my gaze one last time before leaving him to the authorities. "You'd be surprised what people like me can do, Mr. Sterling," I told him simply. "Now sit down. We have a lot of paperwork to go through." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. Everyone at the nearby tables heard him. They knew what he meant. They pretended not to. The heat was not from the kitchen line, but from the rush of blood behind my ears. My professional smile did not just slip, it shattered. I had trained myself for this job. I needed this money. But most of all, I needed to keep this cover. My internal voice screamed, "He does not know who you are." He saw a uniform. He saw brown skin. He saw someone beneath him, someone easily dismissed. I held the heavy coffee pot, my grip aching. I nodded slowly, a small, controlled movement that cost me everything. "I apologize if the service did not meet your expectations, sir. I will ensure we address this immediately." I walked away from the table, not back to the kitchen, but towards the bus station near the back exit. I needed 30 seconds to breathe. I leaned against the wall, where the ice machine rattled its steady rhythm. "This is fine. You are fine." This wasn't new. This wasn't the first time a wealthy, entitled man had used his money as a weapon, targeting the person he thought could never fight back. I closed my eyes and pictured the IRS office, the steel desk, the organized binders, the calm, decisive voice of my supervisor, Mr. Chen. He'd told me this assignment was high risk, high stakes. Harris is slippery, Aisha, he had said. He's arrogant. He believes he's untouchable. You need to be invisible until you aren't. Invisible, that was the key. But being invisible felt like swallowing the insult whole, letting it burn a hole through me. I adjusted my uniform, the stiff collar, a comforting chokehold, reminding me of the boundaries I had set for myself. I forced my expression into the vacant neutrality required of high-end service staff. Then I headed back out into the dining room. He saw me coming. Mr. Harris had clearly enjoyed the small public performance of his dominance. He snapped his fingers, loudly. "Waitress, where did you disappear to?" His voice carried too easily across the linen tablecloths. "I was fetching your fresh cream, sir. My apologies for the delay." I placed the small silver pitcher down, making sure it landed silently. He leaned forward, dropping the veneer of general complaint. Now, he wanted to make it personal. "Look, darling," he began, his voice dropping slightly, the condescension growing thicker. "I come here every week. I spend a lot of money here. People like me keep places like this running." He paused, looking me up and down. "You, on the other hand, you look like you're doing us a favor just by standing here. You look bored. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." He was right. I would rather be in my office, signing the warrant to freeze his assets. He continued, waving his hand dismissively. "It's a service industry. You understand that? You serve. We pay. Try to look grateful. It's what pays your rent. Or do you even pay rent?" The subtle sting of implying I was an outsider, somehow relying on charity or his class to survive, was textbook Harris. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, replacing the heat of humiliation. It was the feeling I got when I knew a case was solid, irreversible. I cleared my throat softly. "I understand the parameters of my employment, sir." He laughed, a short, cruel burst of air. "Do you? Or are you just repeating what the manager told you in training? Never mind, just bring the check. I'm tired of looking at your face." He signaled his companion, a much younger woman who had been sipping champagne silently, looking down at her phone throughout the exchange, that they were ready to leave. As I began to clear the plates, my eyes dropped, and that was when I saw it. He had been reviewing documents, business documents. He'd tossed them carelessly onto the seat of the neighboring chair, assuming no one would look. But I wasn't just anyone. I was the person who had spent the last 6 weeks cataloging every single line item on his corporate ledger. The folder was thin, expensive leather. The logo, embossed subtly in the corner, was undeniable. It was the stylized falcon of Aegis Financial Solutions, his shell corporation, the very entity through which he had funneled millions in untaxed capital into offshore accounts in Curacao. It was the main focus of my current, high-priority audit. I froze for a fraction of a second, the heavy ceramic plate balanced perfectly in my hand. He wasn't just a rude, rich man I was investigating generally. He was the target, right here, sitting 5 feet away from me. I saw the file number scribbled hastily on the top sheet of paper poking out of the folder. It matched the case number in my desk drawer exactly. This encounter wasn't just a coincidence. It was a spectacular, unbelievable convergence. All the pain of the last 5 minutes, the sharp, piercing feeling of being diminished, vanished. It was replaced by a laser focus, a sudden, thrilling clarity. I was no longer the humiliated waitress. I was the hunter. And he, entirely unaware, was casually sitting in my sights. He reached into his jacket for his wallet, extracting a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the table under his water glass, sliding it deliberately toward the edge closest to me. "Keep the change," he said, not bothering to look at me. "Maybe buy yourself something nice. A book on manners, perhaps?" He stood up, pulling his companion with him. They walked toward the exit, his posture arrogant, his victory complete. He had used me to demonstrate his power in front of his date. I watched them go, retrieving the check folder and the $100 note. I didn't count the change. I didn't care about the tip. My mind was already 3 moves ahead. I went back to the bus station, my movements suddenly precise and energized. I placed the dishes down without a sound. My heart was beating a heavy, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. I reached under the service counter, where my small, cheap canvas bag was stored, tucked away among the spare napkins and cleaning supplies. I pulled out the internal pocket and retrieved a small, government-issued laminated card. My identification, my authority. I placed the card on the counter next to my personal cell phone. I needed to make a call, not to my manager, apologizing for the scene, not to cry to my mother. I needed to call Mr. Chen, but first I needed to know something specific about Aegis Financial Solutions, something that would confirm the timeline of the investigation. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my personal phone, accessing the encrypted government server. It only took 30 seconds to find the file note. His arrogance had provided the perfect opportunity, the necessary proximity. He thought he had just humiliated a young, struggling woman over coffee and manners. He had actually just handed the IRS auditor auditing his entire life the final piece of evidence she needed, right there on the linen tablecloth. I looked down at the $100 tip he had left, the condescending gesture. I slipped it into my apron pocket. I would need gas money for the drive to the federal building later tonight. I picked up the phone, ignoring the rattling of the ice machine, ignoring the distant sound of polite chatter. The waitress was gone. Aisha was calling the shots now. My finger hovered over Mr. Chen's direct line. I knew exactly what I was going to say. "Mr. Chen, it's Aisha. I found him. And sir, I think we can upgrade this from a preliminary audit to an immediate freeze." I pressed the button to connect the call. The smell of burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant hit me as I stepped into the staff corridor. My hands were still steady. That was the trick. No matter the insult, no matter the fire in your gut, your hands must be steady. He had called me something vile, something dismissive, something that reminded me exactly where he thought I belonged. Disposable. That was the word he used. I leaned against the cold brick wall in the alleyway behind the kitchen. The manager, David, hurried past, his face pale with fear. "Kayla, please, ignore him. Mr. Sterling is high profile. Just finish your shift. I'll make sure you get a full cut of the big party's tip." He thought money could fix the sting of being called disposable. He thought money was the only thing I cared about. I looked at David. He wasn't malicious, just weak. He was trapped in the same system, afraid of the wealthy men who paid his salary. I nodded once, letting him think I was compliant. I waited until the swinging doors stopped moving. Then I pulled out the burner phone hidden deep inside the lining of my apron. It was cheap plastic, entirely encrypted, and registered under a shell name. It was not for ordering takeout. My fingers trembled slightly as I keyed in the restaurant's reservation log reference number. I needed absolute certainty. Even after the insult, even after the rage, I needed professional confirmation. The screen lit up. A profile appeared. Victor Sterling, CEO of Sterling Holdings. Residence, Greenwich, CT. Primary business location, Miami, FL. And then, the critical line. The one I knew by heart, but needed to see in black and white. Subject of high priority IRS audit. Case 479 Gamma. Lead auditor, K. James. K. James. That was me. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool brick. This was not a coincidence. This was fate, delivered by the universe with a side of bile and entitlement. I was here, posing as a waitress for two specific reasons. First, to monitor the casual spending habits of several targets in a neutral environment. Second, to cultivate a public identity that would make any future professional encounter seem ridiculous. To make him underestimate me completely. The casual cruelty he showed me confirmed everything I already suspected about him. The files didn't lie. A man who uses his company funds to buy a six-figure yacht and write it off as office landscaping will not hesitate to treat service staff like dirt beneath his shoe. His financial crimes were not accidental bookkeeping errors. They were structural, deliberate, built on the assumption that rules were for poor people. I unlocked the phone again and accessed the secure portal. I filtered the audit details for the necessary documentation. The stack of evidence was enormous. Years of falsified deductions, off-the-books transactions wired through a chain of offshore accounts. We had months of work. But tonight, the timeline had changed. I was no longer just auditing figures. I was responding to a personal attack while wearing the uniform of the very people he despised. The transition back into my professional role felt like slipping on Kevlar plating. The shame dissolved, replaced by focus. I was not Kayla the waitress anymore. I was Kayla James, lead auditor, and I was about to collect. I needed to move fast. He thought I was stupid and terrified. That was my only remaining advantage. I checked the time. The restaurant would be winding down its first seating rush. Mr. Sterling and his associates were settling in for digestives and conversation. Perfect. They would be loose, distracted, confident. I deleted the phone logs and slipped the device back into my apron. I adjusted my posture, smoothing the fabric of the uniform that now felt less like a costume and more like a tactical disguise. I focused on the last piece of information I needed for the legal paperwork. I needed physical confirmation that he was still using the same financial institution we suspected was hiding the bulk of his assets. And I had seen something. When Mr. Sterling first arrived, he had placed a worn leather briefcase right next to his chair. It wasn't the kind of briefcase meant for files. It was the kind meant for private, immediate documents. I had seen a sliver of paper peeking out when he fumbled with his napkin. A bank letterhead. It was bright blue and silver, distinctive. If it was the offshore bank we suspected, the audit could stop being a long-term investigation and become an immediate seizure order. The risk was immense. If I was caught touching his private property, even as a waitress, the entire operation could be compromised. He could claim entrapment or harassment, but the insult was still echoing in my ears. Disposable. I walked out of the staff area, back onto the floor. My movements were slow, almost meditative. I needed to clear the water glasses from table 14, the table adjacent to Mr. Sterling's. It was time to get very close to the briefcase. I breathed in deeply. The game was about to change. I just had to make sure I was the only one who knew how to play the next move. I picked up my tray, my mind already formulating the excuse for the inevitable mistake I would soon make near his chair. I walked towards the light, towards him. The glass of water I was carrying rattled, not from my hand shaking, but from the sudden, sharp intake of breath. The room, which had been a low hum of breakfast chatter, went dead quiet around table 7. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his leather blanket, smug. He had said it loud enough for the busser, the hostess, and the couple sipping mimosas near the window to hear. Maybe if they trained the help a little better, they wouldn't spill half the order before it reached the table. He didn't even look at me when he said, "the help." He addressed the manager, who was scrambling to apologize, and wiped the tiny splash of coffee from Harrison's pristine white cup. I stood there, the weight of the silver tray suddenly unbearable. It wasn't the spill, it was the casual, inherent dismissal. The way he used that word, help, stripping me of any personal dignity, reducing me to a disposable piece of cleaning equipment. I felt the familiar, hot pressure behind my eyes. I refused to cry. Not here. Not for him. This uniform, this name tag, they were camouflage, temporary armor designed to let me see deep into the rot of his business dealings. But the shame was real. It felt exactly like every other microaggression. Every time I had been followed in a store. Every time someone assumed I was the delivery person in a professional setting. A wave of icy calm washed over the heat. I looked at his face, the soft jowls, the entitled sneer, the absolute certainty that his wealth granted him the right to crush others beneath his heel. He looked at me with open contempt, then waved his hand dismissively. Just get me another black coffee and make sure she doesn't bring it. The manager, Mr. Davies, was apologetic, tripping over himself to escort me away. Tia, go take 5. I'll handle the rest of table 7. I nodded, mechanical. I walked to the service station, but I didn't clock out. I didn't take 5. My heart pounded a relentless, low drum against my ribs. He doesn't know who you are. The irony was crushing. The man who owned 3 pharmaceutical import companies, who was currently under intensive audit for suspected tax fraud and shell corporation abuse, was lecturing me about competence and training. I slid into the small, cramped storage closet adjacent to the kitchen, where my purse and belongings were kept. I needed to feel the weight of my actual life, my actual job, not the plastic name tag that read Tia. My hand reached inside my worn leather messenger bag and wrapped around the ID card holder, the hard plastic corners dug into my palm. I didn't need to look at it to see the federal seal, the crisp photo, the title, Tiana Evans, Senior Auditor, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I thought of my mother. She worked 2 jobs, 3 sometimes, just to keep the lights on, just to buy me the used textbooks that helped me claw my way through college. She endured humiliation every day, cleaning up after people like Mr. Harrison, quietly absorbing insults because she needed the paycheck. She always told me, Tiana, your knowledge is the one thing they can't take from you. Use it to build a wall they can't climb over. I wasn't wearing my knowledge now. I was wearing an apron. But the uniform of subservience was coming off. I opened the large official envelope I had prepared days ago. It contained the final notification of comprehensive audit and summons for production of documents for Harrison Global Holdings. It was thick, sealed, and carried the weight of federal mandate. This wasn't just about collecting revenue. This was a criminal investigation, and Mr. Harrison had just violated rule number 1 of dealing with federal agents. Never underestimate the person serving you. My mission was surveillance, to observe his routine, his contacts, and his emotional state before the audit went live, to catch him off guard. I had intended to serve the papers discreetly later this afternoon, perhaps through his lawyer or a private meeting. But the insult, the sheer casual brutality of his disrespect had changed the timeline. It wasn't professional to let personal feelings interfere, but sometimes personal feelings were the most potent catalyst for justice. He had just humiliated me in front of my temporary co-workers, in front of the public. He had tried to strip me of my dignity. Now, he was going to pay the immediate emotional price of that arrogance. I smoothed the crisp fabric of my waitress apron. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling my spine straight. My posture was no longer that of a server anticipating a tip, but of an officer preparing for engagement. I had been Tiana the waitress. Now I was Miss Evans, auditor. The transformation was internal, but absolute. My expression hardened, losing the practiced softness required for customer service. I tucked the large manila envelope under my arm, careful not to wrinkle the seal. I stepped out of the closet and walked past the shocked faces of the kitchen staff. They saw the envelope, the intensity in my eyes, and they instantly understood. This was not a coffee run. I walked directly back toward table 7. Mr. Harrison was holding court, laughing loudly with his colleague about some golf game, entirely oblivious. He saw me approaching, and his smile dropped, replaced by annoyance. I told the manager to send someone else, he grumbled, reaching into his pocket, clearly intending to wave me away with a dollar bill. Did you hear me? You're not needed here. I stopped right beside his chair, my shadow falling over his untouched plate of eggs. I ignored his outstretched hand. I ignored his friend, who was beginning to look uncomfortable. I didn't raise my voice. The silence around us grew heavy, thick with the smell of expensive cologne and fear. I placed the heavy manila envelope on the white linen table directly in front of his water glass. The sound it made, a soft, decisive thud, cut through the restaurant chatter like a gunshot. Then I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time since I stepped into this restaurant 2 weeks ago, I let him see the full, focused weight of my professional authority. My voice was low, clear, and perfectly flat. It was the voice of the state, devoid of emotion and totally dominant. My name is Tiana Evans. I paused just long enough for the name to register. And I am not your help, Mr. Harrison. I watched the entitled smirk shatter on his face. He reached for the envelope, confused. I am a senior auditor with the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. His hand froze halfway to the paper. His colleague gasped audibly. I continued, relentless, the humiliation of minutes ago fueling every single syllable. This document is a formal summons and notification of comprehensive federal audit for Harrison Global Holdings, effective immediately. He finally looked at the seal on the envelope, then back at the waitress uniform I was still wearing. The utter disbelief and dawning horror in his eyes was immediate and total. It was the moment the ground beneath his expensive loafers simply disappeared. You should read that very carefully, sir, I concluded, stepping back, retrieving my tray. And I highly suggest you cancel those afternoon golf plans. I left him staring at the seal, his mouth slightly open, the realization of the catastrophe I represented finally sinking in. The table was silent. The entire restaurant felt the sudden shift in power. I had served more than coffee that morning. I had served justice. And the bill was astronomical. I knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting. But for that one brief, perfect moment, the weight of the apron had been replaced by the weight of the law, and the satisfaction was profound. The next step was the quiet conversation I needed to have with Mr. Davies about my immediate contract termination and the confidential transfer of all evidence I had gathered in the last 2 weeks. The game was on. Mr. Sterling's face dissolved. The arrogance vaporized, replaced by a ghastly, immediate panic. He tried to laugh, a shallow, pathetic sound that died instantly in the stunned silence of the dining room. "This is a joke, a mistake," he stammered, pulling at his expensive tie. "You think you can just pull this kind of prank?" I did not move. I did not soften my gaze. The waiting staff uniform felt like thin wrapping paper I was finally ripping away. "This is not a prank, Mr. Sterling. This is an official notice," I repeated, my voice dropping lower, demanding attention. I reached into the discreet black pouch I wore on my hip, the one designed to carry receipts and small change. Today it held the heavy weight of authority. I pulled out my official badge and identification folder. I snapped it open and held it perfectly level, directly in front of his line of sight. Malia Johnson, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, Level 9. My official capacity today is auditor in charge of the investigation into Sterling Holdings. I watched the words hit him. I continued methodically, detailing the precise scope of his undoing. The audit is focused on immediate access to your full financial ledger, specifically surrounding suspicious shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The color drained from his face completely. The mention of the Cayman Islands was the ultimate confirmation. That was the hidden vault he thought was impenetrable. His eyes darted desperately around the room, pleading with strangers for someone to declare this scene impossible, absurd. The entire dining room had frozen. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware from a far corner. "You were so focused on judging my uniform, Mr. Sterling," I said, allowing a cold edge into my tone. "You never considered I might be judging your life, your ethics, and your financial compliance." I pushed the heavy stack of official documentation across the table, sliding it past his water glass until it rested beside his untouched silverware. "This is a formal summons, demanding immediate access to all records, effective 9 a.m. tomorrow. Failure to comply will result in a rapid judicial warrant and asset seizure." He snatched the papers up, his hands shaking violently enough to rattle the salt shaker. His bravado was completely gone. The entitled bully was reduced to a terrified debtor. This is insane. I demand to speak to your manager," he shrieked, the volume returning out of sheer denial. "I demand to speak to your supervisor." "I am the supervisor now, in this specific transaction, Mr. Sterling," I corrected him calmly. "And the general manager of this establishment you just complained to?" I glanced over at Mr. Davies, who was leaning against the wall, pale and rigid. "He will be cooperating fully with our inquiry. We already interviewed him last week regarding the sudden influx of cash we believe you used this restaurant to launder." His jaw worked soundlessly. The trap was set, sprung, and secured. I allowed myself a single, slow breath. The relief was immense, but it wasn't joy. It was the solemn feeling of dignity recovered. "Earlier today, you told me I was nothing but a servant, that people like me were disposable. You warned me to know my place and stay in my lane." I leaned in, maintaining the impeccable posture that had been drilled into me during my years in the service industry, a posture that now served a far more powerful purpose. "My place, Mr. Sterling, is right here, holding the authority to scrutinize every single dishonest dollar you have ever hidden from the American public. And my job," I finished, letting the weight of the investigation settle over him, "is to ensure you pay the full lawful price for your crimes." His denial instantly escalated into desperate negotiation. He tried to lean forward, attempting to reduce this catastrophe to a whispered private mistake. "Agent Johnson, please, we can talk about this. I apologize for the comments. The things I said, they were regrettable. Just table talk. I was having a bad day." "No, Mr. Sterling, they were documented, and they were profoundly revealing," I responded, showing him no quarter. "They showed exactly the kind of arrogant character we expected to find behind these fraudulent financial statements." I stepped back deliberately, unfastening the knot of the linen apron from around my waist. I folded it neatly, symbolizing the end of that role. The mask was off. I turned to Mr. Davies, the manager, who was still staring in shock. "Mr. Davies, secure this table. Ensure Mr. Sterling does not remove any documents or personal electronics. We have notified local law enforcement, and they will be here momentarily to escort him from the premises." Davies nodded mutely, unable to form a word. He had witnessed the total, instant crumbling of unchecked entitlement. I placed the neatly folded apron onto the host's stand. My humiliation was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus on the serious work ahead. I walked toward the exit, my gait measured. No longer burdened by the demands of the service industry, I was simply moving with the cold, controlled dignity of a federal officer. The incident was over. The power reversal was complete. But the real fight had just begun. He thought I was simply seeking personal justice for myself. He had no idea how thoroughly I intended to investigate every single aspect of his dishonest empire. Starting tomorrow morning, I was seeking justice for everyone he had ever trampled. The quiet part of the operation was done. The loud legal storm was about to break, and I was ready to weather it. His eyes were wide, unfocused, jumping between my face and the laminated identification card. Mr. Sterling looked less like a corporate titan and more like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He tried to laugh, a hollow, forced sound that died quickly in the air. "This is a joke, right? A prank?" he stammered, gripping the edge of the table. "You think you can play games with me? I know the manager here." I folded my hands professionally over the front of my apron. My voice dropped 2 octaves, losing all the friendly warmth of the server and gaining the cold, precise edge of the federal agent. "There are no games, Mr. Sterling. The Internal Revenue Service does not execute pranks." I cited the statute numbers quickly, smoothly, listing the specific areas of his business we were targeting. The shift in my demeanor was absolute. I was no longer serving his water. I was draining his accounts. "You are currently under investigation for significant unreported income, structuring transactions to avoid reporting requirements, and misuse of corporate expenses for personal gain," I stated clearly. My words cut through the background chatter of the restaurant. "The nature of our investigation required us to confirm your behavior and operational patterns outside of a sterile office environment." He finally understood why I was standing there in a cheap uniform, clearing plates. He understood that his casual, petty contempt for me, the way he saw all service workers, had been observed, recorded, and documented by the very authority currently preparing to dismantle his entire financial world. The humiliation was instant and visceral. It wasn't just the fact of the audit. It was the fact that the person he had belittled, the person he saw as invisible, was the one holding the keys to his financial prison. "You cannot possibly have the authority," he whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He still couldn't look me in the eye. "I assure you, I do." I reached into my apron pocket again, pulling out a sealed manila envelope. The official IRS seal was stark and authoritative against the bright white paper. "This envelope contains a subpoena for immediate access to your corporate records at Sterling Industries, including all banking statements, expense reports, and correspondence related to your offshore accounts, effective immediately." I slid the envelope across the table, right next to the remnants of his unfinished lobster roll. It was a perfect, silent symbol of the disruption he was experiencing. "I have already spoken to your chief financial officer. They are expecting my call within the hour to arrange secure delivery of these documents to our field office." He tried to gather himself, puffing up his chest. The habit of superiority was hard to break. "You won't find anything. My lawyers are brilliant. You people never win against firms like mine." I offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Mr. Sterling, brilliant lawyers are excellent at navigating the gray areas. We are here because you left the gray areas far behind and waltzed directly into the black and white." I paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The nearby diners were quiet now, watching the scene unfold, perhaps realizing the dramatic transformation that had just occurred. This was not just about tax fraud. It was about character. The way you treat people, waitresses, drivers, delivery staff. It tells us everything we need to know about your integrity or lack thereof in business. Your casual disregard for a living wage, your assumption that I was beneath you, that I didn't deserve basic respect. My voice remained steady, yet firm. That attitude, Mr. Sterling, is the exact same attitude that allows you to skim millions off the top, believing the rules simply don't apply to people like you. I apologize, he blurted out suddenly, desperation seizing him. I apologize for the comment. It was rude. I'll give you a generous tip. I'll double it. Just forget this whole thing. The sheer audacity of trying to bribe a federal auditor with a tip he would have refused 5 minutes ago was breathtaking. I leaned slightly closer. The time for apology, sir, was when you insulted a woman trying to earn a living. The time for bargaining is over. This is a federal investigation. I looked pointedly at my wrist, though I wasn't wearing a watch. You have exactly 30 minutes to clear your business and prepare to meet with my team tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp at the federal building. Bring all documents specified in the subpoena. He made a pathetic choking sound. Tomorrow morning? That's impossible. My schedule. Your schedule just changed. I finished for him. The IRS does not negotiate start times when fraud is suspected. You should consider yourself lucky you were served this paper here, in a public restaurant, and not at your home with federal marshals. I gave one last final glance around the dining room. My manager, Maria, stood by the reservation desk, her jaw slack. She didn't look terrified. She looked vindicated. I peeled off the apron, letting it drop lightly onto the empty chair next to him. The uniform was officially shed. Underneath, I was wearing a tailored suit jacket, the clothes I wore to the office. I am formally concluding my undercover duties, Mr. Sterling. I picked up my cell phone, already speed dialing my supervisor. I recommend you call your attorney immediately. You have a long night ahead of you. I turned, leaving him alone at the expensive table, sitting among the debris of his lunch and the ruins of his empire. The paper subpoena felt hotter and heavier than any fine dining plate he had ever been served. I walked toward the exit, Maria rushing up to meet me, but I shook my head, signaling silence. This wasn't the time for congratulations. The justice was still being engineered. As I reached the doors, I paused, taking a deep breath of the fresh air outside. The emotional weight of the morning, the insult, the fury, the calculated reveal was heavy. But I knew the most difficult and potentially most satisfying part of the job still lay ahead. The full, comprehensive forensic accounting that would inevitably confirm his downfall. The investigation was now officially underway. The next step was securing the critical hard drives before his team could sanitize the evidence. And I knew exactly who to call to handle that technical side of things. I opened my phone contacts, searching for the number of Agent Davies. Tonight, we would coordinate the legal seizure. Tomorrow, Mr. Sterling would finally face the music, playing directly from my sheet. The gray office was a stark contrast to the lively noise of the restaurant floor. Arthur sat across the wide government-issue metal desk. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit today. He wore expensive casual clothes that seemed to sag on him. His face was pale, sunken. I looked at him, recognizing him instantly, yet barely seeing the arrogant man who had stood over me just days before. Now, he was just a file. File 19B77. He tried to start with a rambling apology, mentioning the stress of his business, the heat of the moment, the confusion. "Miss Davis," he pleaded, his voice thin, "I assure you, I was having a very bad day. My behavior was inexcusable. But please understand, that has nothing to do with my company's tax filings." I didn't react to the apology. I didn't even acknowledge the name Miss Davis. I picked up the thick binder in front of me. It was marked Preliminary Findings. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice low and completely neutral. The same voice I used when calling vendor references or cross-checking invoices. "We are here today to discuss your business activities related to Thorne Holdings, specifically the discrepancies identified in the Schedule C filings for the last 4 fiscal years." He tried to interrupt. He wanted to pivot back to the restaurant, to the misunderstanding. "I have already documented the events of last Tuesday," I cut in smoothly. "That is now filed with Human Resources, and will be used solely to verify the context of our official contact should the need arise. It is tangential to the investigation. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the binder. This investigation began 3 months ago, Mr. Thorne. It began because of anomalous patterns reported by our automated systems regarding your use of offshore shell corporations and the excessive deductions claimed for consulting fees. His breath hitched. He had genuinely believed I had only started looking at him after the restaurant incident. He looked utterly betrayed, as if I had somehow cheated him. You should have been notified 2 weeks ago via certified mail, but given the acceleration of the timeline due to recent events, we proceeded directly to this meeting. I opened the binder to the first tab. Let's start with the $1.2 million expense logged for the renovation of the company's corporate headquarters. He cleared his throat. Yes, we upgraded the facility. Standard depreciation applies. The address listed for those renovations, I continued, ignoring his defense, corresponds exactly to your private residence in Greenwich, a residence that, according to county records, is solely listed in your wife's name. The silence hung heavy in the room. He didn't need to answer. His face answered for him. He had been writing off luxury personal upgrades as business expenses, a common sloppy fraud tactic. Beyond that, I continued, flipping the page, we have identified 9 separate payments made over a 2-year period, totaling just over $400,000 to a singular offshore entity registered in the Caymans, listed as Advisory Services, Inc. I pulled out a printed sheet. Can you provide a detailed ledger of the services rendered by Advisory Services in case that warranted nearly $500,000 in payments? He swallowed hard. He looked down at the table, just as he had looked down at me when I was clearing his plate. It was specialized strategic planning, he mumbled. Mr. Thorne, I said, pausing just long enough for the gravity to sink in. Advisory Services, Inc. is owned entirely by your nephew, who currently resides in Portugal, and according to his social media, designs custom fishing lures. It wasn't personal anymore. It wasn't about the insult or the tip. It was about the cold, quantifiable theft of public funds. It was about the law. I watched the realization hit him. He wasn't facing a slighted waitress anymore. He was facing the apparatus of the U.S. government, armed with months of quiet research. I need to inform you that, effective immediately, I stated, reading from the official notice I slid across the table. All corporate bank accounts associated with Thorne Holdings are subject to a temporary freeze, pending the full reconciliation of the identified discrepancies. The initial estimated underreporting is significant enough to warrant immediate action. He stared at the page, his face slack. He understood what a freeze meant. It meant payroll stopped. It meant contracts were immediately voided. It meant his business, his empire built on lies and arrogance, was about to cease functioning. He finally looked up, terror replacing indignation. You can't do that, he whispered. That will destroy everything. You did that, Mr. Thorne, I corrected him calmly. The documents did that. I am simply reading the consequences. He pushed back from the table, suddenly energized by panic. We can fix this. I can pay whatever fine you demand. We can settle this. I will triple whatever you lost. Please, Miss Davis, we can discuss this professionally, outside of this setting. He was attempting to bribe an IRS auditor investigating serious financial fraud. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. We are already discussing this professionally, Mr. Thorne, I said, folding my hands neatly. The opportunity for a voluntary disclosure agreement passed the moment the audit notification was generated. I have lawyers. You are overreaching. I demand to speak to your supervisor. You have a conflict of interest. This whole investigation is based on a personal grudge, shouted, desperation making his voice crack. I pressed the small discreet button under the desk. You are welcome to speak to my supervisor, Mr. Thorne. She is aware of the situation and has signed off on the current action plan. A stern-faced woman in a navy suit entered the room instantly. Arthur deflated further, recognizing the uniform authority. Furthermore, I continued, maintaining eye contact with him, I suggest you contact your lawyers immediately. They will explain that the context of our meeting at the restaurant, while regrettable, does not invalidate the 3 months of forensic evidence gathered against Thorne Holdings. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 48 hours to provide all requested documentation related to the Advisory Services Inc. Shell Company. Failure to comply will escalate this file directly to the Justice Department for prosecution. I watched him slump, suddenly small and broken. The sheer weight of the bureaucracy, the cold legality of the financial collapse, was crushing him faster than any shouted argument ever could. He finally pushed himself out of the chair, not meeting my gaze as he walked past my supervisor and out the door. He didn't look like a rich, entitled man anymore. He looked like a defendant. I sat back down, the silence of the office overwhelming after his outburst. The initial spike of adrenaline, the immediate rush of poetic justice I felt at the restaurant, was gone. It was replaced by a deep, quiet satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the satisfaction of competence. I did not expose him because he was a terrible human being. I exposed him because he was a criminal. The fact that he was also a racist just meant that, in his arrogance, he had handed me the platform to do my job without hesitation. I knew he would fight. He had the money and the pride to drag this out for months, maybe years. This was far from over, but the cornerstone had been placed. His empire was crumbling. The next phase, the meticulous, slow dismantling in court, was about to begin. I picked up the phone and dialed my team. We need to prepare the initial report for the U.S. Attorney's Office, I instructed, my voice firm. We are moving forward with maximum penalties. The silence in the restaurant was thick and terrible. Caldwell was shaking his head, sweat pooling beneath his expensive collar. He tried to stand up, his chair scraping violently. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "A massive political mistake. You're lying. You cannot be an auditor. You're the help." He still couldn't shed the ingrained contempt. Even facing ruin, the racism was his default setting. I simply looked at him, folding the enforcement request neatly. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, projecting only enough for the tables immediately around us to hear clearly. "The Internal Revenue Service does not make political mistakes when investigating multi-million-dollar tax evasion schemes." His face drained of all color. "The audit began 9 months ago, based on discrepancies in the 1099 filings related to several shell corporations. The complexity of your offshore holdings was impressive, I will give you that, but your arrogance was ultimately your failure." He opened his mouth to shout a denial, but I didn't let him. "You came here today, Mr. Caldwell, believing you were untouchable. You believed that your wealth affords you the right to treat human beings like dirt. You believed I was irrelevant." I paused, letting that sink into the shocked room. My function as a temporary service worker was entirely legal and necessary to observe your operational patterns, your cash flow habits, and your personal conduct. It was a required field investigation. I looked pointedly at the remnants of his untouched steak. "But I want to be clear about something else. Your abusive behavior toward me personally, your comments about my education, my worth, and my race, had absolutely no bearing on the financial investigation. Those financial crimes were already committed, documented, and substantiated long before you decided to insult the black girl serving you coffee. However," I added, my voice hardening slightly, "your conduct here today serves as a powerful testament to the moral corruption that often accompanies this level of tax fraud. It shows a severe, intentional disrespect for the very system you claim to operate within." I signaled discreetly toward the front door. Two individuals, wearing crisp, dark suits and carrying official briefcases, entered the dining area. They weren't police. They were IRS criminal investigation agents. The sheer weight of their official presence silenced the last murmurings of the room. Caldwell saw them. He finally understood the finality of the situation. His empire was collapsing right here, over a cup of watered-down coffee and his own ugly mouth. He sank back into the booth, defeated. A pathetic, whimpering sound escaped him. The lead agent, a tall, serious woman named Agent Reynolds, approached our table. She nodded curtly to me. "Auditor Johnson, we'll take it from here." I handed her the documents. The transfer of power was immediate and absolute. "Mr. Caldwell," Agent Reynolds said, her voice dry and devoid of emotion, "you are required to accompany us downtown immediately. We need to discuss the particulars of the warrant related to the seizure of assets and the potential criminal charges." Caldwell didn't argue. He looked sick. As the agents escorted him away, not roughly, but with chilling professional efficiency, he glanced back at me one last time. There was sheer hatred in his eyes, but now it was mixed with naked terror. I didn't flinch. I was done with him. The manager, David, rushed over, his face pale and slick with fear. "Maya, Miss Johnson, Auditor Johnson. I am so profoundly sorry. I had no idea. You should have told me. Everything I said about your performance, about the uniform." He was rambling, terrified that the IRS was about to audit his little bistro too. I interrupted him gently. "David, I understand. My role required strict confidentiality. You were just doing your job." I took off my apron, folding it neatly on the edge of the abandoned table. "This role is officially concluded," I said. "I'm afraid I won't be needing the next shift." He started to apologize again, begging me to understand the pressure he was under. He even tried to offer me back pay. "David," I said, a faint smile touching my lips, "keep the back pay. Use it to hire someone who genuinely needs this job." I picked up my purse. I didn't wait for another word. I walked out of the opulent bistro and into the bright afternoon sun. The air outside felt cleaner, crisper. I drove home slowly. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a profound, weary satisfaction. It wasn't victory in the cinematic sense, with confetti and cheering. It was victory in the systemic, meticulous sense. Justice served not through personal vengeance, but through the rigorous application of the law. I hadn't revealed my identity to destroy him. I revealed it because his tax evasion was a threat to the community, a threat that disproportionately harmed the very people he felt entitled to abuse. I called my chief, Agent Dubois, once I was safe at my apartment. "The fieldwork is complete, Chief. Caldwell is in custody. The handover was clean." "Excellent work, Maya. You navigated that situation perfectly. It sounds like you got everything we needed, and then some." "It was illuminating, Chief," I admitted. "You see the numbers on the screen for so long, and then you meet the person behind the fraud. It clarifies why we do what we do." "Now comes the long game," Dubois warned me. "He has layers of expensive lawyers. He'll fight every penalty. The criminal side is strong, but the civil process is a marathon." I knew that. Poetic justice might have been delivered in the restaurant, a moment of profound public reckoning, but real justice, the justice that ensures the taxes are paid and the system is reinforced, that requires months, perhaps years, of careful, relentless paperwork. I sat on my couch, suddenly exhausted. The waitress uniform was crumpled in a ball on the floor, ready for the trash. I thought about Caldwell, likely sitting in a stark interrogation room now, stripped of his privilege, his money unable to buy him out of this initial crisis. He learned the hard way that day that when you underestimate the person serving you, you risk underestimating the institution standing behind them. And sometimes that person is the institution. This was the end of the field mission. But the audit, the real battle for accountability, was only just beginning. I had weeks of deep forensic accounting ahead of me, tracing every penny he tried to hide. I closed my eyes, resting for just a minute. Tomorrow, the suits come back on. The quiet, relentless work of dismantling a corrupt man's kingdom had officially moved from the diner booth to the conference room. I was ready. I was completely ready.